Hello and welcome. Thanks for tuning in today. I do appreciate it. Imagine waking up one day and trying to turn on your computer or cell phone, but it won't turn on. When considering the current financial system, the power grid is often overlooked as a crucial component of day-to-day transactions. With many payment systems being digital today, what would happen to our economy if the grid were to go down? Here to dive into this topic with us today is the Silver Hermit. He is a market analyst and sound money advocate. Oren, welcome back. It's great to speak with you today.
Good evening. How do you do? Thanks for having me.
Today, virtually everything we do relies on electricity, and we don't even think about it. When we push the power button on any given device, it just turns on, and we can make our breakfast or check our email or do whatever it is that we want to do. But what if the device didn't turn on? Oren, where does our power come from today, and would our current financial system be in trouble if the grid went down?
Yes, um, I think nowadays we can't even imagine life without electricity and also without the internet. Now, the thing is that it's a relatively new phenomenon. I think people have had electricity in their homes for only about 100 years at max, and we've only been really dependent on electricity. I mean, as a society, I think since perhaps the 1960s or the 1970s. So it's a relatively new phenomenon, the extent to which we are reliant on this single infrastructure called the grid. And we kind of tend to forget that in order to have electricity, we constantly need to generate power and we constantly need to maintain that grid. So there's people, back there doing the work, doing the maintenance work in order to keep that electricity going. So where does our electricity come from? What are our sources of energy? So it may surprise everyone, but we're still mostly reliant on coal. 34% of electricity globally comes from burning coal. Next in line is natural gas, 22%. Other fossil fuels, only 3%. And nowadays, we also have all those renewable sources of energy, for instance, hydro, which is responsible to 14% of global power, wind 8%, and solar energy 7%. Now, another source of energy, which I'm afraid is, not more common, is of course nuclear energy, which is responsible for only 9% of total global energy production. Now, I say that it's a very, unfortunate thing that nuclear is not more widespread. Well, because, first of all, because it could have been abundant. It could have supplied us with an abundant amount of cheap energy if we were to invest properly in constructing all those nuclear reactors. But mainly due to political reasons, mainly due to the fact that people are afraid of nuclear energy, we haven't developed that energy source. We haven't developed it sufficiently. So, and as a matter of fact, as we're going to see later on in this show, certain countries are even phasing out existing nuclear power. So right now, we are reliant either on fossil fuels or on renewables. And as we're going to see, that's kind of problematic.
Right. Well, how stable would you say our grid is today? And how much of that power that we're using that's renewable makes our grid less stable?
Yes, so that's something that people are completely unaware of. The fact that the introduction of renewable sources of energy is destabilizing the power grid. We assume that, as long as the power is on, we assume that it's perfectly fine, and there are reasonable and responsible people managing it. But in
Right.
recent years, we've seen this push to transition towards renewable sources of energy due to the fear of global warming, due to the fear of climate change affecting our planet, affecting our ecosystem. So the incentive to switch from fossil fuels to renewables, the incentive behind it is not the stability of the system, not the continuous ability to supply energy to the population. There are other incentives there affecting decision makers. So the thing about renewables is that they're intermittent. Solar energy doesn't work when the sun doesn't shine. And of course, wind turbines don't work when the wind doesn't blow. And this means that you have there are variables. So you have more energy during the day, and of course you have more energy during certain times of the year. And it is very difficult for a grid, an energy grid, to deal with this intermittent nature of these energy sources. And in order to deal with this with the intermittent nature of these energy sources, you either have to store energy, which is difficult and requires a lot of investment in infrastructure, or you need to keep backup energy sources uh, available at all times so that they can instantly kick in whenever there is a drop in the yield from the renewable sources. And this is exactly what we see, for instance, in Germany. So Germany decided back in the day, a few years ago, to switch to renewable sources of energy. Well, first, it decommissioned its nuclear power plants. It decided to do so in 2011, and it gradually shut down all its nuclear power plants, and the last three were shut down in 2023.
Wow.
And yeah, and it is aiming at reaching 80% production from renewables by 2030. Currently, it stands at 59% coming from solar and wind. And the problem is there's not enough storage capacity, so they need to keep power plants which are fueled by natural gas at all times. But even the supply of natural gas, as we've seen, wasn't guaranteed. In September of 2022, we've had that incident in which the Nord Stream pipelines between Russia and Germany were sabotaged, and three out of the four pipelines were destroyed. And this, of course, endangered the ability of Germany to continue supplying electricity to its people. And luckily for them, they had enough other sources. They didn't have a huge power outage, but it does demonstrate the fragility of the system. The fact that they are so reliant on renewable sources of energy, and they don't have enough backup they don't have enough alternative traditional source of energy to back them out, to back them up. So, uh, but we have seen the prices of electricity in Germany rising. And electricity
Oh,
in Germany nowadays is so expensive that certain industries which need power, a lot of power in order to operate, they're shutting down. So we're seeing this process of deindustrialization due to the fact that power is too expensive and there's not enough of it, and they are too reliant on renewable sources of energy which are intermittent. And we've also seen similar problems across the world, for instance, in Spain, in South Australia, in California, in Texas, etc.
That is crazy that Germany is shutting down that many of their nuclear power plants. And the fact that they're having to deindustrialize really just shows that this is something that can put your nation in a really bad position. So the incentives today are not in line with having a stable grid. Um, Spain had experienced a blackout earlier this year. Now, what caused that blackout? Did that have anything to do with renewable energy sources?
Yes, that's an excellent example of the problem that we're witnessing today. I want to read you an article from CNN about the massive blackout that we've seen in Spain and Portugal earlier this year. So I'll just very briefly I'll read you out of that article. They say Spain's government said Tuesday that the massive April power outage across Spain and Portugal that left tens of millions of people disconnected in seconds was caused by technical and planning errors that left the grid unable to handle a surge in voltage. Now, notice the following sentence. Ecological Transition Minister Sarah Agassiz, who manages the nation's energy policy, told reporters that a voltage surge led to small grid failures, mainly in the south of Spain, which then cascaded to larger ones and brought the system down in the two Iberian Peninsula nations. Now, I just want you to notice what is her title? She's not the energy minister. She's the ecological transition minister, which shows you like their priorities. It shows you that they prioritize the ecological transition, transitioning to renewable sources of energy, rather than keeping the stability of the energy, the electricity grid, and delivering electricity to their nation. So it shows you that their priorities are upside down, and eventually it's going to lead to such cases where you have massive power outages. And they go on saying she ruled out that the failure was due to a cyber attack. The outage began shortly after noon on April 28th in Spain and lasted through nightfall, disrupting businesses, transit systems, cellular networks, internet connectivity, and other critical infrastructure. Spain lost 15 gigawatts of electricity, or about 60% of its supply. Portugal, whose grid is connected to Spain, also went down. Only the country's islands and territories were spared. So you can see that even a relatively small malfunction at a certain area can cascade into a complete collapse of the entire grid because it's so interconnected, and probably because it was on the edge all the time because they didn't have enough reserves, and they were generating exactly the amount that they needed. So any increase in demand, for instance, due to a very hot day, so people are turning on their AC units more than usual, it can bring down the entire system.
That is really interesting. And because that was associated with solar, it does make me wonder about the individual systems, the individual inverters. If these systems get put under a lot of pressure, there's probably not a good standard because these are probably a lot of systems that individuals are putting up, or maybe smaller power companies in some cases. And if they just want to provide the kilowatt hours that they're going for at the lowest price possible, they might not be making good decisions on an individual level.
Yes, that's
Um,
that's a good point. That's a good point because the incentive of the power companies is to generate as little as possible in order to cut expenses. While the interest of the nation is to have enough reserves that so if you have a surge in demand, you can meet that demand without having to, initiate blackouts or brownouts and stuff like that.
Right. And that is crazy that their priority is not to ensure that the power stays on, but to ensure that they're getting a certain percentage of the power from renewable resources.
Yes.
Now, if we want to have uninterrupted access to electricity, is nuclear power the best option, or would you say it's really too dangerous for the environment to be one of our primary power sources?
Well, back in the day, nuclear reactors were a bit more dangerous than they are today. You had the potential of meltdown, but it was only due to the way in which they were constructed or designed in the first place. You can, as we've recently seen, you can construct uh, nuclear reactors. Modern nuclear reactors are designed in such a way in which they can't melt down. They are designed in such a way that if they malfunction for any reason, they simply shut down automatically. And it's
Interesting.
built into their, yeah, it's built into their design, into the way they are constructed. So they will shut down automatically if there's any problem. And as a matter of fact, we are seeing nowadays designs, nuclear reactor designs, which are smaller and allow you, they're about the size of let's say, a trailer,
Okay.
and you can like bury them underground and they will automatically, without any supervision, supply power to, let's say, a neighborhood for 100 years.
That sounds pretty nice.
Yes, and they're completely, I think, completely independent. They don't need any maintenance or hardly any maintenance. So there are solutions. It's simply very difficult to construct new nuclear installations because there's political resistance to that. And the process, the red tape is enormous. I mean, like if you wanted to, I heard somewhere, I read somewhere that if you wanted nowadays to construct a new nuclear power plant in the US, just getting it approved would take 20 years.
Wow. That's crazy. That just seems like
So
an unreasonably long amount of time.
yes. So naturally, power companies, that's they don't opt for this kind, like who can even guess or know what kind of power demand we'll have in 20 years? So who can even embark on such a project when there's so much uncertainty surrounding it? So,
That's a good
and
point.
at the same time, you get economic incentives, you get subsidies if you try to construct, if you construct solar power plants or wind turbines, they get subsidies and they get encouraged by the government. So it's much easier to go for that solution, even though these are intermittent sources of energy and they contribute to the instability of the grid.
Right, absolutely. And I know some of the incentives out here are in the form of renewable energy credits. And so the idea is if homeowners provide more power than their home needs, then the power company can buy that power back from them to put it into the rest of the grid. And so, yeah, I mean, talk about intermittent. I mean, they don't have a good handle on how well these people are maintaining their systems. All of these systems are going to be various ages. Um, and so
Don't get me wrong. I see why, for instance, for people who are off the grid, for instance, solar can be a great solution.
sure,
I
absolutely.
can't fault them for wanting solar energy when that's either the only solution or the cheapest solution they can come up with. But if you look at it systemically, if you look at the grid as a whole, then having too much solar and wind is not good. When there are a small, only a small percentage of your energy mix then it's fine. The system can handle the intermittent nature of these sources of energy, of the renewables, when it's a small percentage. But when they become like the majority of your power generation, then it becomes a huge problem.
Right, absolutely.
And our politicians, they as though don't have the incentive to even deal with this problem. See what
Oh,
I
right.
mean?
Yeah, yeah, you never hear them talking about the instability of the grid. It,
Yes.
it it just doesn't come
It's
up.
like it's just something that we take for granted. And uh, the only reason it's a miracle that we still have such a reliable electricity grid, and it's only thanks to, those engineers working all the time to maintain the grid and try to mitigate all those problems. The question is, how long can they do it? How long will be able to do it when we're constantly throwing at them a more difficult situation, constantly throwing at them a more and more difficult situation?
Right, we're constantly making their job harder.
Yes. Now, the next topic that
So,
I wanted to talk about is not something which is man-made, it's something which is natural, and it's called solar flares. Now, the issue of solar flares, these are as though magnetic storms. They're called geomagnetic storms. They come from the sun. The sun, at times, it has those eruptions of electromagnetic radiation.
yeah, a coronal mass
And
ejection.
yes, it
Right.
usually happens together with coronal mass injections. And it can result, when we're talking about a strong event, this could potentially induce currents in unshielded electronic systems and fry them.
Oh, right. And an
And
electromagnetic pulse, I mean, if it was a big one, it could instantly cripple our power grid, bring our entire tech-dependent society to a standstill.
your personal devices, your computer, your cellular phone, they are, of course, fragile. They are vulnerable to a strong solar flare that can induce currents and fry them. But they can relatively easily be replaced. And if
Right.
I compare that to the grid, if I compare that to our infrastructures, the if it fries them, if it fries the grid, then it's a lot more difficult to repair. So I just want to add a bit more information about it. So the sun, it has those 11-year long cycles of magnetic activity.
Okay.
We are currently in the middle of cycle number 25 since we started making records back in 1755. Back in 1755, we started recording those magnetic cycles. And solar flares, of course, are more common in the middle, at the height of the solar cycle, which is
Okay.
right now, by the way. So we were kind of expecting the current cycle to be very weak, and right now it is stronger than expected. So we have more magnetic activity on the sun, but it's not unusual. The current cycle is pretty normal to, all the past records that we have. But there are times in which the sun is exceptionally active magnetically. And we have, for instance, a historical event called the Carrington event. Now, the Carrington event happened in September of 1859. This was during solar cycle number 10. And this was the most intense geomagnetic storm ever recorded. Now, just imagine it was in during the 19th century. So, electricity, the study of electricity was in its infancy. and we didn't have a lot of infrastructure that used electricity. The main infrastructure that used electricity back then were telegraph lines.
So,
And yeah, even though there was very little infrastructure that could have been affected by the event, we still observed and recorded sparks and even fires in telegraph stations.
wow.
Yes. And also, they were familiar with that, those northern lights.
Yes.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yes, the aurora borealis. So it was seen, it was viewed, it could have been viewed all over the planet
Yikes.
because, yes, the amount of radiation that hit the atmosphere was so great that you could see those northern lights everywhere in the sky. And the event was recorded by two British astronomers, Richard Carrington and Richard Hodgson. And of course, the event is named after Richard Carrington. Okay, so a geomagnetic storm of this magnitude, if it were to happen today, it would wreak havoc.
Oh, I bet. And so it sounds like if you see northern lights in an area where you've never seen them before, that's a good warning sign. An event like this has just taken place, and
Yeah,
you might
I,
not be
I
able to turn on some of your electronics, or maybe there will be some fires breaking out.
By the time you see the Northern Lights, it's probably too late to do anything about it. I mean, it's already hit the atmosphere. I do think that they have early warning signs. For instance, um, uh, I think NASA is recording the activity, the magnetic activity of the sun, and they do have some systems for early warning, and they are able to give you a warning ahead of time. But even if we do get a warning, I'm not sure it's going to help because we have such huge infrastructure which can't be simply shielded overnight. It
N
takes
No
too
way.
much work to start shielding all our power lines, all our high voltage power lines. We can't do that.
Yeah, there is no way. I mean, if an individual had a Faraday cage, like that they could put down in their basement or something, and they could run and put their devices in there, maybe they could protect a few of their personal items. But like you had mentioned earlier, these are going to be some of the easiest things to replace. You can just go to the phone store and get a new phone, potentially.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, a Faraday cage is simply a casing, a metal casing, which is connected to the ground and blocks any electromagnetic radiation from entering the box.
Yes.
Yeah, and you can shield your personal devices, such as your phone or your computer, in a Faraday cage, but you can't like surround the entire power grid with a Faraday cage. It's sprawling all over the country. It's too big. It's you can't do that. It's not practical.
Right.
So right now the grid is exposed. Now, I think the most vulnerable piece of the grid is what we call the electrical transformers. These are devices large when it comes to, to the grid, to high voltage power lines. You need transformers in order to step up or step down voltage levels. And they
Right. So
use,
So these are like
yeah,
really important to the overall grid. I mean, and it sounds like these probably aren't easy to replace. I mean, is this something where if the grid went down, let's just say there was a fast pulse EMP surge in the system and it took a bunch of these transformers down, are there like warehouses full of them, or would we be in a lot of trouble if like a bunch of these got damaged?
no, no, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. We're talking about very large devices which
Okay.
use induction to step up or step down voltage levels. They can be the size of a room, and they are custom made. So
Dang.
The large ones, the big ones that deal with high voltage lines, they don't have, you can't go to the hardware store and just buy a new one. They have to be custom made, and it takes months to construct such a, such a transformer according to very specific, according to local specifications, and they can't just be easily replaced. And if you have a big enough geomagnetic storm, it can fry the transformers and shut down the power grid for weeks, if not months.
Right. I mean, and it sounds like potentially even years. If you could imagine a whole bunch of cities all trying to get access to transformers, and then also the limitation of people who are certified to work with the high voltage systems. It sounds like it could be a real mess. Is there
Yes.
any way for us to protect the grid from EMPs, um, you know, that would be realistic?
Yeah, so the good news is that there are efforts to mitigate such the risk of a large geomagnetic event, a large geomagnetic storms. So there are a few federal programs to protect the grid against such a scenario. For instance, the Western Area Power Administration installed the first US commercially developed NBD, which stands for Neutral Blocking Device, at White Substation in South Dakota in November of 2022. And it was successfully tested during a geomagnetic storm in February of 2023. So there are things that we can do. There are devices that we can install in order to reduce the effect of a surge, such a geomagnetic storm on the grid. But only a handful of these have been installed thus far. So most of the most of the grid is still vulnerable.
Well, hopefully they'll get some MBDs set up in your area, in my area, and all the listeners' areas before too long. Because that would be nice to have that peace of mind that at least that was there to help mitigate, this is a problem. Now,
Yes.
people a lot of
I'm
times will put,
afraid, I have to say, I'm afraid that bureaucrats, government bureaucrats, they have this tendency to deal with a problem only after a catastrophe has already happened. I mean, like if you get this huge event, huge geomagnetic event, and you get a power outage for a few weeks, then suddenly you'll see all those government resources, directed at the problem, and it's going to be fixed within a year or two. But before the event happens, there's very little chance that they're, going to deal with it seriously.
that's a really good point. And then after it happens, that'll be one of the primary things they talk about when they're campaigning for office. I'll be the one to protect the grid. But yeah, up until that point, we won't hear anything about it, I bet.
If I may, I just want to go back to the issue of electric transformers, because there was a
Yes.
point that I neglected to mention, that the thing about transformers is that right now there are very few like companies, corporations that construct them, because of course they were added to the grid very gradually over the years. Every time that you needed to expand the grid, so you constructed another of those transformers, and you had it, or perhaps replaced a small one with a larger one. So we don't have the capacity to manufacture them en masse.
I
We
see.
only have a small capacity to add one or two, I don't know, just a few of them every now and then, because this is the way the grid evolved. You never had a sudden demand for huge amounts of those transformers. So we don't have the capacity to manufacture them en masse, suddenly. And if you have this kind of event, which is global, for instance, and suddenly every grid in every country needs those transformers to replace the ones that got fried, that got destroyed, then you have this bottleneck. And
Right.
it's going to take a long time to replace, not because we don't have the technology, we know how to create transformers, just because we don't have the manufacturing capacity ready at hand.
That's a good point. So we will be in deep trouble if there is widespread outages and a bunch of these transformers
Yes,
get
yes.
damaged.
Yes, and this is why I see the potential for a power outage, a global power outage, which will last not a day or two, but months. It's going to take them, the power is going to return very gradually, but it's going to take them perhaps months to fully restore the grid all over the country and all over the world.
I know a big concern has been high altitude nuclear detonations. This is sometimes brought up as a threat to the grid. How effective do you think an attack like this would be if the goal was to take down the power grid across, let's say, like an entire nation?
Yes, that's a good point. These are what we call EMPs, um, electromagnetic pulse weapons, they simulate the same effect of a solar flare. If you detonate a nuclear bomb at a high altitude, for instance, you're not trying to kill the population, but you're just trying to generate this pulse, this electromagnetic pulse, which will fry all the electron all the electronic systems in the country and make it easier for you, for instance, to invade that country, to take over. Or perhaps it's just a terrorist attack. You're trying to destroy the economy of a developed nation
Sure.
by detonating such a weapon above, in its sky.
So, two potential ways that this could happen. Now, it does seem like our current financial system is very reliant on the power grid, with most payments being digital today. What would happen to our economy if the grid went down?
Yeah, so just imagine. There's this push by governments in recent years to phase out physical paper cash. And they want all our payments to be digital, and they want you to use either your credit card or your Apple Pay or your Venmo or whatever payment system, digital payment system. And they want you to be reliant on those payment systems. And if the grid is disrupted, that means that pretty much all those payment systems are unavailable.
Right. Yeah, but they're so interested in tracking us, tracking what we're doing with our money. Um, they've completely left the fragility of this grid um, out of their minds when they're making these decisions. And yeah, that would be a really messy situation if the grid was to go down. Now, some
Yes.
people seem to be under the impression that cryptos would be relatively unaffected by a power outage, but perhaps even by a long power outage. Without a working grid up, let's just say someone had power at a remote location, how effectively would they still be able to use their cryptos?
I can't see how our economy, the way it is set up today, how it can possibly function without power and without the internet. I think we're we're pretty much going to devolve back to back to a barter economy very quickly. I mean, like within days. And certainly within the large cities, which constantly rely, like nobody in the large cities has a large, stock of food at home. I think we're staring at the potential for absolute chaos.
Right. I don't think the system's set up for it at all. You'll see certain things here and there that are still up and running, but you're right. The people in the cities, they don't stockpile food. There might be an occasional prepper in the city, but for the most part, they don't. And there would be a lot of problems if they did have cash and they could go to the grocery store. Well, within a pretty short amount of time, you're going to be down to just the non-perishable items because all of the frozen section, everything in the refrigerated section, all that stuff's going to go bad, pretty quick. So we could have a real problem on our hands.
Yes. I think that if it lasts for more than 24 hours, you're going to start seeing people raiding the local supermarkets, raiding the stores, just because they can't they can't pay for those groceries, so they're just going to take them. And I think it's going to be a mess. So you asked me about crypto. So
Yes.
that's a good question. I'm not an expert on crypto. I'm guessing that the widespread power outage will affect cryptocurrencies and disrupt them. And take for instance Bitcoin, which is relies on nodes, which constantly those miners. So there's going to be the hash rate is going to fall. You're going to have problems, probably slower transaction confirmations, reduced network hash rates. Uh,
Right.
Look, this system, I know that this system is was designed so it can withstand um, disruptions to the network. It was set up this way, but I don't think it was ever put to the test. This is going to be the first time in which we're seeing crypto try to deal with problems with its the infrastructure which it relies on, which is the power and the internet.
Right. Absolutely. Um, it would be interesting to see, like you had said, the transaction speeds would be slowed down. And I mean, and they might come to dang near a standstill, trying to do these checks if there was only a certain amount of them available at the various nodes to do the checks for the transactions. And it wouldn't surprise me if during an event like this, once people did come to the realizations that this actually isn't going to work well if the grid is down. If we saw them lose quite a bit of value, it wouldn't
Yes.
surprise me if we saw that.
Yes, I think that's even a bigger risk to crypto is not that the system, the network stops working. It's just that people start realizing how dependent those cryptocurrencies are on infrastructure, which is, beyond their control, and that people are going to try and sell those cryptos because they're going to want other assets which are, not dependent on the grid and not dependent on the internet, such as precious metals. And that could induce a major, massive sell-off that in itself will risk the future of cryptocurrencies.
Right, absolutely. Now, because gold and silver were considered to be money for such a long time, we're talking thousands of years globally, it would make sense that there would be widespread acceptance of either metal for goods or services in a grid down situation. Could you see them effectively becoming money again in a situation like this? And what form of gold or silver do you think might be the most effective for trading or bartering?
Yes, so obviously gold and silver who work, quote unquote, even when you don't have power, when you don't have electricity and you don't have the internet, their value is independent. They don't need any infrastructure to back them up. And so you're going to be able to count on your physical gold and silver to still be respected, accepted by perhaps not all stores and not all merchants, but at least some of them. I'm guessing that in the case of a widespread power outage, suddenly the ability to barter using silver, for instance, what we call junk silver or constitutional silver, those that fractional silver, which has low enough, small enough value so it can be traded against some groceries. Suddenly it's going to be very practical and suddenly it's going to be very useful. And I think many people are suddenly going to realize just how practical it is to hold some physical gold and silver, and suddenly you're going to have a surge in demand. And this could actually make silver money again, simply because people see with their own eyes just how practical it is to hold it during times of emergencies. And even when the emergency is over, I'm guessing that people are still, they're going to have the memory of that event, and they're going to still want to hold some of it at their home just in case such an emergency returns. And that, I believe, will make eventually will make silver money again.
That makes sense. That would I could definitely see that making a lot of people think, hey, I need to have at least a small amount of this around in case there's an emergency again like this, because I wasn't prepared last time and I'm not going to get caught with my pants down twice, you know?
Yes, they're going to, for instance, see how their neighbors dealt better than they, because they had silver. They could deal with that emergency far better. Perhaps they could buy food, they could buy water, they could buy whatever when they suffered from had to go on for days or weeks without those basic necessities. So I think it's going to have a lasting effect on the population and on people's psyche.
Not to sound too negative in regards to this issue, but if there was a total nationwide grid failure, I could unfortunately see a lot of people dying in a situation like that. If the grid was down for a long time, and let's just say if it was hard to get the high voltage trained technicians together, if it was hard to get these transformers manufactured, and this went on for years. Well, if you don't have access to a sustainable food source, you could be in big trouble. If you do have access to a sustainable food source, this might not be the case. Um, Having access to a wood burning stove or a fireplace could save people's lives, especially in northern climate zones, where it gets really cold. Um, Hopefully, if something like this happened, it would be limited. But either way, once the power was back on, um, what steps do you think would be taken to try and insulate our financial system in the event that it
Mm.
might go back down again at some point in the future?
Yes. So I see the likelihood of this event. I think it's more likely that such an event will last for only a few months. I'm really hoping that if such an event happens lasts for a few years, that means that you've had such widespread riots and such widespread such a conflict was downstream of the lack of energy, that yeah, that law enforcement, that law and order, which simply deteriorated, and as a result you were not able to restore the power. But I think it's more likely that you're going to see a national effort in order to restore those transformers, restore the grid. I think such an effort within a few months can restore the grid. So I think a more optimistic scenario is more likely. But the thing is, once power is restored, I'm quite certain that there's going to be a huge pressure on governments across the world to roll back all those plans to phase out cash, for instance. They're going to have to reconsider the entire idea of relying on electricity and relying on the internet for the entire economy, because that means you don't have any redundancy. You have nothing to fall back on. And so in order to have that redundancy, you need to have physical cash, hopefully physical gold and silver. And hopefully they will recognize that you need to have physical money. So the economy wouldn't be completely disrupted if such an event returns. I'll just say that long term, after such an event, I see the prices, for instance, of stocks and bonds. They could they could fall simply because once you restore trading returns to normal, but people have this memory that stocks and bonds were not available, their portfolios were not available. Maybe they're going to have to start pricing in this risk, which they were unaware of before. So perhaps the prices of stocks and bonds are going to fall as a result, and the prices of precious metals are going to rise, and you have going to have an entirely new balance in this investment world.
That makes sense. I could see the metals going up a lot in value because everyone would have this realization, this reminder of what they really are.
Yes, right.
Well, Orrin, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and insights on this topic. Thank you to everyone who watched today. Please hit the like button if you enjoyed the video, and don't forget to check out Orrin's links in the description. I hope you all have a great day out there, and we will catch you in the next video.